Welcome to the IT Experience podcast. IT dashboards can look green while employees are quietly struggling. We call that the watermelon effect. This show digs into how top IT leaders turn experience into intelligence and prove real business impact. Brought to you by Happy Signals, the leading experience intelligence platform.
Hello, my name is Martin Beecher and welcome to this episode of Meet the Practitioner, where today I'm joined by Martin Beecher. In this episode, we're going to explore a few key areas associated with IT experience management. First, Martin, welcome to the podcast, and why don't you give us a brief introduction?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Mark. So Martin Beecher, I am currently working with a company called ScienceCo, who are a futuristic chemicals manufacturer, specialty polymers and composite materials. If you've been in the air recently on an aeroplane, or indeed as an astronaut, then you've been connected to some of our products. So we're quite advanced in the materials that we produce. I've been with ScienceCo since the start of January last year, so we've done a year and a half. It's in its infancy as an organisation. It's only 2 years old. It was a breakaway from a company called Solvay, which is a very large chemical manufacturer globally, and it's based in Belgium. So we're a Belgian but global organisation. My history, not to bore you too much, I was 12 years with Computer Center as a supplier, working on multiple accounts as a senior service manager and service director over many years. And before that, I was a teacher and taught secondary education and physical education at that. So that's my background and where I'm from.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martin. And I did, I took the liberty of looking at your LinkedIn profile a bit before we spoke, and I know that you've had very similar roles to me. So your background in service management is very similar to mine. I know you've been at a number of years. You just mentioned the computer center part. So how did you move from being a teacher into service management? It's an interesting transition, I guess. And then I guess the next question, the follow-up to that is, what made you move into IT experience management, or was it just a stroke of luck like mine was?
I think it's all luck, right? I mean, you don't sit in a field being a PE teacher one day and think, do you know what, I'm going to go and join service management in the IT sector. That's it's just something that doesn't happen, of course. But so it was quite by chance that I came across this path, if you like. I won't go into too much detail as to how and why that happened, but very quickly, I joined at the bottom end of IT, as most people do. Working on projects, just hardware refresh projects in the centre of London, and then progressed quite rapidly. I think one of the fortunate things about teaching, certainly in education, I'm going to keep coming back to this a little bit, is there are a lot of shared skills that you have as a teacher, which can support with the transition into service management and the way that that's managed. I've equally, as you have done, Mark, I've done my homework as well, and I've listened to one or two of the podcasts that you've released over time, and and I recognise, I think there's a commonality, there's a theme there around how we look towards empathy more now than we have in the past with IT and the way that we manage things. So I think that the transition of the movement of IT away from the technical towards the feeling side, the experience side, has helped me, because that's where I'm more active and more able to have a voice of seniority. Where if it's the technical side, unfortunately, I disappear. I edge out of the room as soon as people start getting technical on me, because, well, funnily enough, as a PE teacher, we didn't do much of that kind of stuff, right? So that's where I sit with it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, falling into the experience part, like I say, is quite natural off the basis of that, because that's where you start with a level of empathy as a teacher. You understand how, specific to children, of course, but the business world isn't so far removed from children, believe you me. And I think making sure that we manage people and manage expectation and manage, the way that we want people to interact with our services is exactly the same, almost exactly the same as trying to get children involved in activities and sports in school. That sphere's changed a lot now. It was a long time since I was there. It's nigh on 20 years since I've left that area, but indeed, it's there's a lot of similarities that I can draw upon.
Hey, so that's a really interesting transition, and it's the first of that kind that I've heard. And typically, what I hear from people moving into ITXM is service managers, and that's exactly what's happened here with you. but it's the bit before that was really interesting, from teacher, from the children into business. That's a really interesting one, because I always found it seemed to be, I'm going to say this really carefully, the people that seem to care naturally in their lives about something really deeply. They have this almost passion about something. It might be about quality of service. It might be about something like that. That leads into the service manager. Then they see the problems that are out there, right? With, employees getting a bad service, or a service that they don't quite agree with, and that's when they move naturally into ITXM. So yeah, it's a very interesting way round. Yeah, but I guess you've done that story, right? You've gone from the service manager into ITXM, which is very, very cool.
Indeed. There's a natural progression, like you say. I think where people have a higher level of empathy and they understand what the issues are, I think we want to make it better. And I think that's the point. That's the principle. That's why we end up here. It's not a bad place to be, right? It means that we're able to actually do something about that part that says you can make a difference. I think IT for far too long, and I wasn't there at the beginning, of course, like I say, but IT is very much was about the technical side. And somebody who I listened to on one of your podcasts mentioned this as well, and they said that IT's progressed now, where it's not about generally the equipment's a lot better. You don't need the level of support that you needed before. You don't need people, doing so much activity. It's now about the experience, and it's much more focused on what you can give people out of the applications or the hardware, the software, the support, not just how they are hung together. That part, of course, it still needs to happen. I'm not belittling it. But for us as service managers in our service management careers, you're the front desk, you're the receptionist to IT. And on the basis of that, you have to be ready with a smile. You have to think about the other person who you're interacting with. And I think one of the things for me, if I go back to that education part, one of the things for me that I know I can deliver quite well on is supporting my delivery teams to think more about the receipt of what they're providing and really show them what they're looking, show the people who they're delivering to as a customer what the product is, how they're supporting them, or the service, whatever it may be. Think about how that's received, how it's consumed. Is it the most efficient method? Is it the most right? Does it drive the right level of efficiency? Not for IT, but for the end user, for the actual business that needs that level of support. And I think that's where I've been fortunate to be able to bring that skill, if you like, or that identity, that process of identifying those opportunities into the business. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And my personal experience of it was that our service management team ended up being mostly escalation management team, if that makes sense. So it was a natural progression through the fact that we were sort of eyeballs out, if that makes sense, in escalations. So it made absolute sense that we tried to do something about that more proactively than just keep accepting 80% of our time being spent in escalations. So, and actually it makes it a bit more of an interesting job, right? Not to just handle escalations all the time, but to be seen as more proactive and more empathetic, as you said. So yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. Okay, so what we do a lot of the time is we have almost like a competition with CSAT, SLAs, and KPIs. So what's your views on those things? Are they sufficient? Are they enough? Are they dead? Are they what? What's your view on those sort of things?
I don't think you can say that anything's dead. I think there's everything. What's the phrase that I'm looking for? Everything has a time and a place. Do you know what? I remember seeing it in my grand's living room. It was stitched up on the wall. All things to a season, a time, and a place. Something like this.
Yeah.
But that's the point. Everything has a relevance at some level, and it's really important. You need, and teach you to suck eggs, but we know that the SLAs, the KPIs, they're required to manage your suppliers or indeed your internal teams. Yes, you've got to know whether they've got enough staff to achieve what they need to do, and they're the kind of things that will tell you. That I'm not going to mention watermelons. That needs to not be mentioned here. But of course, we know full well that they're not enough on their own, and we need that CSAT alongside it. We need to understand how that fits into it. You can also then start overlaying the XLA as well, and none of these things on their own give you the view that you need to drive the right level of efficiency as far as I'm concerned. So you can't say that anything's dead. They all have a role to play. They become part of a data suite. So I think one of the things that I've learned since I've moved into the IT world is that, ironically, it's all about data. And I think that's never more true than it is now, where we have so many sources of data. You know, you can have a conversation with somebody in a workplace team and a security team, and they'll tell you, well, we've got a tool that does that. We've got a tool that measures this, and we've got, okay, great. Now stop. Put all the data together. Let's have a look at it comparatively and collectively. Let's really understand what's going on. Overlay it with the experience and the customer satisfaction scores and the feedback that you're getting from the corridor, from the regular interactions with instance and requests, and put all of those things together. And then that's the skill that we now have to define as a way of driving services and businesses forwards. The skill is in how do you interpret the data? What do you drive out of that? Where do you prioritize and give the most value and the most of your time? How do we then turn the business's view into seeing what you see? Because that's the challenge that we have infrequently, I'm sure. And certainly I know I feel it very much in my organization, and I'm sure I'm not alone. I can see what we need to do, but I've got to get everyone else on the same page before we can do it. Some of those are very operational changes, and we can manage and drive them. There's no cost. It's just a time effort and an effort, and an application of a process tweak or whatever it may be. Some of them are big ticket items. That tool actually that you're telling us you're getting this, that tool's not good. It's not doing what we need it to do anymore. It might still be a great tool, but it's not what our business needs. And we need to think about how we're going to change that up. Then there's a big project cost behind it. Of course, it becomes a different level of conversation, but it's the same skill. It's the same requirement to get people to buy into what you can see in the data and how you can articulate that into a business requirement that must just be followed through at a low or a high level.
No, that makes absolute sense as well. It's quite interesting. I'm over in Helsinki at the moment in our pink room, as you can see, and working on the very fact of data, right? So there's so much data, and we need to make sure that we're getting the right data. So the right data about the employee, so contextual data, segmentation data, so we can say it's not just this one big number, this big CSAT number of 4.5 out of 5. It's actually overall 4.5, but over here it's 2.1, over here it's 4.9. So we can segment the data is really quite important. Then, of course, the experience data, the feedback data has got to be more than just a number, right? It has to be why. We can't do anything with a number. And then, of course, the operational and technical data as well on top of that. So trying to put together some material and some recordings around that, which would be quite handy, I think, for a lot of people. So yes, you're right. We have too much data. We have more than enough data, or may even say it that way. And we just need to work out what's important and what's not. And going back to the KPIs and SLAs and so forth, we've used the same things for 25, 30 years. Now, that's not a bad thing. They're still good and needed. But we've become masters at making those green, and that's obviously the watermelon bit, which we won't talk about today. So yes, this adds a new lens to that, doesn't it? You can't affect the way people feel by just playing with numbers, if that makes sense, right? That's what we want to try and avoid.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's think about the last 6 months you've been doing this kind of work with us, Martin, the IT experience management stuff. Is there any early glimmers of information that you're seeing, or any experiences you're having that you want to let people know about? We hear sometimes this is a whole load of effort, right? That's what we sometimes hear, and I don't personally think it is. It wasn't when I was doing this back in 2018 in my former company, but just wanted to see what you feel about how things have gone, how ITXM is changing things for you and your organization.
Yeah, it's a good question. People are coming to me and knocking on our, I say me, to the team. They're knocking on the door to find out what we know, which is that wasn't happening a year ago when we were just in there trying to deliver services. That they are now coming and asking the question. We've raised our head, of course, because we've now got something to show. So we started by luring the CIO in with a score. Look at your CSAT score. Let's tell you what's underneath. He wants the score, and he wants to be, like I say, all things for everybody and horses for courses. He needs that number, but we need the detail underneath, and then we can drive different things. He's not alone. We've had that coming now. We're starting more and more. I had a session with somebody this morning who I've never met before in IT, but they randomly picked up the phone and said, "Look, can I get a session? Can you show me what you can see? I need to be able to," yeah, absolutely, more than welcome. And I think that's the change that we're starting to feel now, is that we're not just out there with a number, because if it was just a number, they don't need to see anything. They're starting to want to consume the information underneath, which is fantastic. Am I nervous they might not need me in a few months' time? Maybe, but that's okay. That's that. You manage yourself out in the right way, then there's always another opportunity. Well, I hope so, anyway. But the point is that we're able to now support people with understanding what's going on. We can drill into the data. We can show them specifically. In the example this morning, I can show her she's responsible for 3 queues. I can show her all the 3 queues. We built her a dashboard for each. We were only on for half an hour. We covered a lot. We didn't even need the full half hour. She's now able to go and feed herself, and she can support the team and identify where they've got issues and where tickets that they thought were closed. Great, another one off the list. Let's get the next one. Actually, hang on a minute, that wasn't done right, and this is why. And they can connect the dots then and start to think about how they can improve their service or the application or whatever it is that they're supporting. And I think that's the key for me. We kind of had an inkling. We knew pretty much what we were going to get from releasing the information in the early stages. We knew that things were taking too long, that there wasn't documentation right, and absolutely I can now prove that with the data. But that's just the iceberg. That's just that's the first click and opening of the screen, and there you go. It's here. We knew that. But what we can do is now we can start to drive into that and really talk to the teams that may not have even thought they thought I'm not responsible for end user experience. I just deliver an application. It's up. It's always up. It never goes down. So why am I responsible for this? Well, actually, if we look into the data, you're responsible because of X, Y, Z. Like I say, there's so many reasons why everybody is intrinsic to this process, and we're able to just share it with them, and that is wonderful. It's a breath of fresh air, and it means that you can walk around. I don't need to explain what I do in our organization anymore, like I did 8 months ago. It's so much easier because everyone, he's the experienced guy, and they know that they can get the data and they can come and talk to me. And I don't want to be the blocker. I don't want everything to go through me. They must just be able to support themselves. And that's been a real eye-opener, a real breath of fresh air into our organisation, and continues to grow and be adopted by more and more teams and more and more processes as we move forward.
That's really awesome. I remember talking to one of our customers in Australia, and I asked them a similar question. They said, it's a bit of effort, but it's good effort. And I think what you're seeing is the good effort. You've put some effort in, obviously. And now, so yes, it's really interesting that people are now coming to you, Martin, as opposed to you having to push the agenda everywhere. And that's really key. And I think you're right that the different levels of, going back to data, the different levels of data we have, the CIO might still be very interested at the really high level of the number. Give me the number, right? And he or she might also be interested in knowing the numbers different in different places, right? So there's still things that he or she might like, but then it's the data beneath that, the why, and I think sometimes we've been measuring these KPIs and metrics that we've had for donkey's years, and they're all good, right? We know they're good, right? But what this puts a lens on is that next level of detail, I think, around, I mean, we sometimes see, for example, or we often see that reassignment counts are high, and not necessarily high. Maybe we're fixing 50% of our tickets with 0 hops, right? But what we didn't know before was they all might come back as we've met SLA, or met KPI, but actually the lost time goes sky high, the happiness goes down when we see that happening. And you're blind to that with just one number, right? Or the old way of doing things, or just KPIs and what have you. So I love the way that we can now interrogate at that level and say, you know what, we can see where operationally we might need to do a bit better, even if the numbers in the past have been perfect for what we had as numbers, right? So I say, yeah, it's a really cool thing to do, and I love the way that it picks up those operational inefficiencies, right? Can we make our people more efficient as well? Because we don't want hopping tickets, right? Because everyone has to read the damn ticket 6 times, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And anybody who's been in service management will know, and maybe shouldn't really say this out loud, but I'm just going to go there. SLAs, they could all be measured. We could all play with numbers. We could all make clocks stop and start. And that ability to measure the time lost against the ticket, you look at the ticket, how long was it actively open? Half an
yeah,
hour.
yeah.
How come then
Six
this
weeks.
person lost 3 weeks, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Well,
where does that correlate? So
that's
yeah,
more than the ticket, isn't it? The stop the clock sort of thing, that the
yeah,
nastiness that we've seen for years. And that goes back to what I said earlier, the fact that these things have been going for 25, 30 years. We've mastered the ability to do what we want with those numbers, right? And to play them as much as we want, whether it be with an internal service provider or external. We're all masters at that now. Bonuses are tied to KPIs, right? So we're going to make them work somehow, by hook or by crook, so they say. But with the feelings of an employee, it's practically, unless you're asking your buddies all the time for numbers, it's practically impossible to mess about with that, right? Because unless you're best buddies, or you've got one supplier measuring the same supplier, do you know what I mean? You're going to get the
yeah,
reality,
yeah.
right? You're going to get how they feel. So yeah, interesting stuff. Okay, so you've had 6 months of data coming in, and you're seems like the world where you live, where you work in, is working really well with this. So what's some of the, I don't know if you can share, not specifics again, but some of the tough stuff you've seen out of this, that whether it be the really negative feedback that sometimes we get, or whether it be the effort, or whatever it might be.
I think trying to think how to say this without putting my career in jeopardy.
Oh, yeah, we don't
No,
have to.
I
We don't
won't
do
go
that.
that far. Don't worry. Yeah, there are. I think having the ability to prove or disprove what people can say is very strong and very powerful. And I think what we've seen recently, all businesses go through a high volume of change. It's the only ever constant, right? And I think that sometimes within that change, people are very quick to make assumptions and make decisions, or and to say how something went well, or something went really badly, depending on if you're inside or outside of it. Normally, is the case. With the tooling and what we have, we're able to prove or disprove those arguments, to a degree. And again, I recognise here you must go back to that point about there's multiple data sources. So one team can say well, I can prove I've done well, and the other team can say, well, I can prove that you haven't. And so you need to be careful. And it's not about fighting and generating conflict. It's absolutely not that. But it's about finding the truth and being able to identify what you can focus on to improve the process and the program and the way that you're operating in that ever-changing environment. I think has been really powerful for us. We frequently go into. I say we. I've seen this for years, right? In service management, people go into a project update and they'll say, it's going great. We've migrated 80% of the population, and we've hit 100 tickets in backlog, and blah blah blah. But actually, then you can look at the overall status of the health of the organization. You can say, well, it's not. Yeah, you might have only had 100 tickets, but how come my customer sats dropped by 30% over the last couple of weeks? Your migration has actually seriously impacted our organization and has led to multiple issues which we need to fight. You might not be seeing that because the level 1 teams are sweating under the heat, literally in this very moment.
Yes.
And managing those issues. We just need to bring that all together so that people can see it. And I think that's one of the advantages that we've had over the last few weeks, is how over the last few months, is being able to let people see that the data is proving or disproving some elements, and then working together to make sure that there's a collective agreement on whether the data is accurate and correct or not.
Final question then. So can you share any of the sort of best and worst feedback you've had today? Anything that you've sat and just either chuckled at or thought, oh my God, no? Anything specific?
Yeah, well, I'll certainly share the best quite happily. I think, again, it goes back to my level of empathy, which I believe personally is quite high, to be discussed with others, I guess. But when you see somebody's name, particularly, you know, we are very close to the level 1 team and our supplier. We have a true partnership, and they're providing an exceptional service in our circumstances to the team and the business. When you get to see one or two of those names specifically mentioned in the feedback, I think it's almost like seeing your child do well at school, you know, because we can be proud and we should celebrate those moments. It doesn't happen very often because people don't necessarily know who these people are who are supporting them, you know, and more so for the site-specific engineers, of course. But when you see those names, I think it's great. And we make a point when we see those names, we must pass that on to their managers, to the leads, and say, look, this has been flagged. You've done a good job here. And can we support them and give them bonuses and that kind of thing? Maybe not. Depends how many names we see, right? But the options there to do something about that, and the more, and again, going back to it, empathy is driven by a relationship. So we learn, I'm sorry, I'm going to bore you back to the education piece, but we learn better from people who we have an emotional connection with. I could go into the chemical balance of the brain if you like, but we won't do that right now. But the point is, we absolutely, if you have an emotional relationship with somebody, you consume the information that they give you in a much different way than somebody who you don't have any connection with. And on that basis, you know, if you can build a relation, and again, I'm stealing from somebody else's podcast who mentioned it on yours, but if you have that relationship, you will score better. You will be perceived to do a better job because you're showing them yourself, your true identity, rather than the facade which many of us wear on and need to. I get it completely, you know, on a regular basis in work. So it's great when we see those names mentioned because we're able to thank them. On the flip side, I guess the biggest frustration, and actually it's about the feedback process maybe, is when you get a 0 and they just put one word, and I won't necessarily say what the word is always, or,
Yes.
and it's not always the same word, believe it or not, but there we go, you know, and that's frustrating because I get it, right? You're angry at that point when you give me that feedback. No problem. Completely understand you've had a poor service, not the word they use. But what we want is we actually need them to tell us why. How, you know, why was it so bad? And that's the frustration, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not always the case, thankfully. They're a small number where it's a short answer. Generally, you can get an essay, and of course, you can do a lot more with an essay, pick out the bits that are relevant and do something with them. So I guess that's the negative side is that, yeah, even negative feedback is constructive, and if you add it all together, of course, you can get something with it from it. But it's the tone sometimes can hurt because we care, and we know that yeah, you've had a bad, whoever's helped you has had a bad day. You've had a bad day on the back of that. We know we can do better. Don't judge us all the time on the same case. Let's hope that we see a different response the next time.
Totally agree. And I'm really pleased you brought up the positive side of this as well, because I remember one of the CIOs we've worked with in one of our organizations who made it very clear. He said to his team, if you use this as a beating stick, I'll use a beating stick, if that makes sense, right? So he wasn't happy with just looking at the negative sides of this. Clearly, there's a lot of improvement initiatives that can come for absolutely, and that's what we should do. But there's always positives in this as well. And most of the feedback we get, in fact, is positive. I think the NPS score benchmark, for instance, is plus 70 odd or plus 80. So clearly we're doing a better job than not, right? So I think we have to celebrate that success and that good stuff as well, and share that as well. Tell the business that actually your feedback is golden. And if you put live screens up around the buildings or whatever you can do, or corporate comms, whatever, it's always good for people. It motivates people. You know, so yeah, very good way of ending that and talking about the positives, which is great. Thank you. Okay, so any final thoughts, Martin, before we close?
Thank you, really, for this opportunity. I think, you know, what I've gained, if I wear the two shoes, when I was with Computer Center, I used to try and support Happy Signals to put the product out there and to make a difference with other businesses. Now I'm wearing that, you know, I'm eating my own dog food, quite not literally, thankfully, but we're in this position now where we're able to drive a level of maturity, and it's fantastic. So I genuinely thank you to you guys, to the team, to the people who've designed the product, because it's empowering. It's allowing us to really stretch and push the business to achieve better. and to deliver a higher level of service. So thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Martin. And for the record, we didn't pay him to say that at all.
I didn't think of that. I should have got that in the clause. Never mind.
You should have asked for payment. No, I'm joking. So thank you for that. That's been a wonderful podcast. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experiences. It's really quite valuable. And of course, if anyone's listening to this at home or wherever you are, thank you for listening to and watching.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a thumbs up. That helps others, your colleagues and peers, to find the show as well.